When I was 13, my family moved to a small rural town in Pennsylvania. The house we lived in was big, 2 stories tall, surrounded by dense woods. The only neighbor we had was half a mile away. Behind our house, there was a long gravel path that stretched into the forest. At first, I loved the solitude. The highlight of our backyard was a treehouse my dad built. It was perched high in an old oak tree, big enough for a few sleeping bags and a lantern. My friends and I would camp out there on weekends, telling ghost stories and daring each other to explore the woods at night. One Friday night in late autumn, my 2 best friends, Danny and Eric, came over for a sleepover. The air was crisp, and the woods felt darker than usual. We spent the evening playing video games and eating pizza, but by 10 p.m., we grabbed our sleeping bags and headed for the treehouse. The woods were eerily quiet. Even the usual rustle of animals felt off. The silence was unnerving, but we brushed it off as our imaginations running wild. Once we climbed into the treehouse, we set up our sleeping bags and lit the lantern. The glow of the light cast long, flickering shadows across the wooden walls. We started telling ghost stories. Danny was halfway through a particularly creepy one when we heard it, a faint crunch of leaves coming from the woods. We froze, looking at each other wide-eyed. "Probably just a deer," Eric said, though his voice wavered. The sound came again, louder this time, like deliberate footsteps. They stopped just beneath the treehouse. Eric peeked through the small window, but it was too dark to see anything. "Hello?" he called out nervously. No response. I leaned closer to the window, trying to adjust my eyes to the darkness. That's when I saw it. A shadowy figure standing just outside the circle of light cast by the treehouse lantern. It wasn't moving, just watching. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Danny and Eric scrambled to look. The figure stood still, unnervingly tall, its face obscured by the shadows. Suddenly, it took a step closer. Panic set in. Danny grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the figure. The beam cut through the darkness, but the figure was gone. "Where did it go?" Eric stammered, his voice cracking. We debated running back to the house, but the thought of climbing down the ladder with someone, or something, lurking in the dark terrified us. So we sat in silence, clutching flashlights, listening for any sound. Minutes passed like hours. Just as we started to convince ourselves it was our imagination, the treehouse shook. A sudden, violent jolt. Something, or someone, was climbing the ladder. We scrambled to the far corner, paralyzed with fear. The lantern flickered, casting erratic shadows. The sound of hands gripping the wooden rungs grew louder. Then it stopped. We held our breath, staring at the open hatch in the floor. Slowly, a hand emerged, pale and bony, gripping the edge. Danny screamed, throwing his flashlight at the hatch. The hand recoiled, and we heard a thud as whatever it was hit the ground below. Without thinking, we bolted down the ladder and ran for the house, screaming for my dad. He burst out the back door, flashlight in hand, just as we reached the porch. "What's going on?" he demanded. Between gasps, we told him everything. He grabbed a baseball bat and scanned the yard with his flashlight, but the figure was gone. The next morning, we found deep gouges in the wood of the treehouse ladder, as if something had clawed at it. My dad dismissed it as an animal, but we knew better. We never camped in the treehouse again. Whatever was in those woods that night wasn't an animal, and sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear footsteps in the leaves.